Well, thanks very much, John, for inviting me to speak tonight to this very select group. And I was just calculating in the bathroom just now that John gave me my first job in paediatrics after a gruelling interview 34 years ago, John. Can you believe that? I must have been a child then. Anyway, thanks for giving me a chance to revisit my childhood memories of living with a passionate collector and growing up in a house that was surrounded by art. I'm certainly no expert in Asian art, and you'll be hearing later from Lu Chuan, but I will aim to give you, as John suggested, a bit about the context of the collection. And I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and you'll see a lot of Aboriginal artefacts here. And I only learned recently, I've got a painting that was Dad's in our hall, painted on the Bellinger River in the island there. And Dad told me that his doctor, who was a GP, used to go out to the island and treat the Aboriginal tribes there. And as a young child, he was taken there and witnessed his first corroboree. And that really, at a very early age, ignited his interest in Aboriginal culture. It's hard to believe that all this fitted in one house, isn't it? Unfortunately, it doesn't all fit in our houses. And I'm sure you'll agree that Deanna, who's up the back, and Moss Green have done a really superb job in displaying the collection. This collection is not only a who's who of Australian art, but it really provides a commentary on our society for over a century. It's eclectic and it confirms Dad's mantra that quality counts and his eye for a good piece. It highlights his passion for supporting young artists and gallery owners, and it reflects not only his work as a doctor, but the extensive travels that he did in that role. As you might imagine, I'm filled with ambivalence tonight, really, as I see this room and some of my friends that are up for sale. And as guardians of these pieces of art, we can only hope as a family that they'll be loved in their new homes as much as they were in their old. But when did all of this begin? Well, probably at the time of conception, because collecting, I think, is a disease that's inherited with a dominant gene. Dad's grandfather was a collector. Dad's father was a collector. Dad was a collector. And much to the dismay of our spouses, it seems that all four of Dad's children have inherited the gene, though fortunately with incomplete penetrance. Dad's grandfather was a school teacher in Mudgee, and he taught Henry Lawson, who was a famous Australian writer. Lawson became a family friend, and he introduced my great-grandparents to Norman Lindsay and many of the other artists of the time, the emerging artists of the time. Due to my grandparents' interests in art, these artists became frequent visitors to Dad's home in the beautiful Bellinger River, in the northern region of New South Wales, and also stayed quite often at their beach house at Nambucca Heads. They stayed with the family during several weeks often of painting trips. And in addition to Norman Lindsay, James Jackson, Elliott Gruner, Lance Solomon, Lloyd Rees, J.J. Hilder, Streeton, and Charles Meare were guests of my grandparents, who even built an annex to the house as an artist's accommodation. So some of the paintings here belong to my grandparents, and I remember them hanging on their walls. The Norman Lindsay watercolour Portobello Road and the Jackson and Solomon landscapes that really capture the light and the beauty of the North New South Wales coastal fringe. So firm friendships developed between my grandparents and all of these artists. For example, once or twice a year, Dad would go with his family down to the Blue Mountains, a long trip in those days, to stay with the Lindsays at their home at Springwood. Indeed, the first painting that Dad ever bought was an oil called Pirate, which is by Norman Lindsay. It's not as part of the auction. And he bought this in 1946 with payment that he received on discharge from the Navy. He bought it for £40, 40 of the £100 that he received in his salary. Also, for his 21st birthday, he received a James Jackson painting of the Bellinger River, which hung on his walls at St Andrew's College to remind him of home. Now, St Andrew's College in those days was a fairly wild place, I think, at times. Janet might verify that. So it was probably atypical for a young student to have these lovely oil paintings on his wall. So after graduating in medicine, Dad started collecting in earnest. He began with Australian furniture, see some of it here, paintings and sculpture. And then during time spent in London when he was training to be an obstetrician and gynaecologist, he collected Meissen, Georgian furniture and silver. Years later, when I was studying in London, he'd arrive in town and off we'd go to the Portobello markets or the silver vaults. No opera or theatre for him, and we'd be looking for a bargain. I soon learned to trust his judgment and his bargaining skills. He always wore his tweed cap, and his dealings were also always preceded by uttering of the word trade. On one occasion, he insisted that I buy a silver salver, although I was hesitating parting with £25, which was over a week's rent for me at that stage. But sure enough, he'd recognised the silver mark, and my salver immediately increased tenfold in value. His photographic memory was legendary, both at university, and it served him well in collecting art. He devoured art books and remembered what he'd seen in those books, and some of them are on display tonight. Later, during years of voluntary work throughout the Asia-Pacific, he started collecting oceanic and Asian art, and he became bewitched by Asian ceramics, and he amassed a huge collection of Indonesian artefacts. He told me that he didn't collect carpets, from which I've concluded that we must have different definitions of collecting. Once, Mum and Dad bought a Chinese rug that was so big that they had to add a room to our Strathfield house to accommodate it. Turned out it was a great party room. During the early days of the movement, Dad began collecting Aboriginal art, and I think that was one of the things about him. He could have stayed in the traditional pattern of the Norman Lindsays and the landscapes, but he moved really rapidly with the times and his tastes really developed. He began buying bark paintings from the Hogarth Gallery and Leo Frischmann at Gallery Primitive, then Balgo paintings, some of them over here from Adrian Newstead at Kui, and Papunya paintings from Chris Hodges at Utopia, including some Emily Kangwari and Gloria Pettiari paintings that you can see here tonight. Dad would pursue a piece he wanted with dogged determination. Once he and a group of friends, which included Rudy Comon, went to the New Hebrides and made a visit to the island of Malakula in search of some old carved tree ferns. With the guidance of his friend, the British Commissioner, Blue Wilkins, they found some of these after an 8-hour trek into the jungle in tropical heat. Together they hauled the loot back to the boat and eventually they shipped them home to Australia. His collecting was both premeditated and opportunistic. A few weeks ago I found a pile of letters sent to international medical colleagues, and many contained mention of items of art. In one letter, after thanking his colleague for organising a visit to Ujung Pandang, he asked him, the colleague, to call in at Mrs. Rustam's shop to pick up a couple of pieces of ceramics that she'd put aside for him. He loved his ceramics and he relished any occasion to get them out, to fondle them and to show them who anyone was interested. And I know some of you, Margaret, have been on visits to his house with the art gallery in the past. As the collection increased, more display cells and cabinets were built at home, and by the time of his death there were many ceramics piled in cupboards in their boxes. In his collecting, he was guided by experts such as Ronald Shen from Singapore, and he acquired items from China, Japan, Korea, Indonesia, Vietnam and Nepal, as represented in some of the items for auction. And this also represented really the extent of his voluntary medical work. My brother Richard recalled that his modus operandus was to go into a shop, engage the owner, and go through all the wares on show. Finally, after an hour or more, when they realised he was serious, they would open the safe and get out the good stuff, and off he went. As a result of Dad's passion, the house of our childhood was filled brimming with objet d'art, and we thought that collecting was the norm. Dad gave me the name Diamond Lil when at the age of 6 I began collecting diamonds. This involved going around to all our neighbours, friends and relatives and asking them if they had any old jewellery that they no longer wanted. I would then pick out the stones from costume jewellery, grade them by colour and shape. I had amassed quite a collection when it came to a horrible end. Against advice of my parents, aged 8, I took them to school, dropped the box of gems and lost most of them through the veranda slats at the school. In primary school, I would take visitors around the tour of the gallery, proudly rattling off the artists' names and the names of their paintings, and being an obsessional child, I photographed them all and put them in an album, which was our first catalogue. And subsequently, my younger siblings, I think, did the same sort of tours. John's had one of those from Richard. Artworks became a part of our family, and we were quite upset when, very rarely, I have to say, one was sold, usually because Mum didn't like it. For some reason, she disliked Tucker, and she complained that the fair weather paintings were disintegrating, so Dad sold those. We frequently had artists visit the house, and when I was given an autograph book, I hit upon the idea of asking visiting artists not for their autographs, but for a drawing. So by the age of 12, I'd acquired, amongst others, drawings by Dobell, Sally Herman, Fred Williams, John Bragg, Bob Dickerson, Lance Solomon, and Donald Friend and Len French, which sit in my autograph book alongside the efforts of my siblings and friends. Dad has supported many artists, both professionally and through their personal struggles, and he calls many of them friends. He described Tas Drysdale as a cricket fanatic and related how he once drove his cricketing friends, Richie Benno and Alan Davidson, up to Terrigal to visit Tas at home. Tas, he said, was also a collector of English, Chinese and European porcelain, and Georgian silver and furniture. Dad first met Brett Whiteley with Rudy Comon when Brett was about 21 and just back from Europe. He bought his first Whiteley, an Ethiopian head, from Kimberlithen. And then long after Brett's death, our family became closely involved with the Whiteleys when my brother Jim married his long-term friend Archie, who tragically died soon after from adrenal cancer. Charles Blackwood was an old friend, and Dad bought from him in London in the 60s. Dad bought the pre-Wimmera Boyd of the Grampians from Brian Johnson, the first time that Boyd had painted his trademark cattle. When Dad was trying to buy a Percival once, Donald Friend was there, and Donald said he wanted the painting. Donald, Dad said, could be quite petulant. Dad said, "Okay, Donald, you have it." A month later, Dad got a call from the gallery saying that Dad could have the painting if he wanted it, because Donald said he couldn't pay for it. They were great friends. Dad also described how he acquired Dobell's Golfer, which is over here. He and a friend were both interested in the Dobell and a John Bragg painting at the Rudy Comon Gallery. When either inquired about the paintings, the unpredictable Rudy, who some of you may remember, said, "But you see, they are not for sale." This went on for some months, Dad said, until one day he came in and Rudy said of the Dobell, "Of course it's a masterpiece. If you like it so much, why don't you take it?" Dad noticed that the Brack was gone, and he said, "Where's the Brack?" Rudy said, "Oh, well, so-and-so was in here last week looking at the masterpiece, and I said to him, if you like it so much, why don't you take that?" Dad also counts many gallery owners as friends, and I recall long lunches of continental delicacies with Rudy Comon and his stable, well-oiled lunches with Ray Hughes, Surrey Hills, and more recently good food, good company and good art with Chris Hodges, Damien Minton and Darren Knight at their galleries. From an early age, we were often recruited as partners in the collector's crime. Saturdays were such a time. Dad, who was rarely sighted during the week due to his gruelling workload, would offer to get us out of Mum's hair by taking us on hospital rounds. We'd drive to King George Hospital in the Jag. He only ever drove a Jaguar, which was filled with interesting items such as obstetric forceps, scientific papers, and pieces of ceramics. He'd deposit us at the front desk of King George V Hospital with the porter, and he'd go and see his patients. And if we'd been good, we'd sometimes be allowed to go up to the nursery to look at the newborn babies through the glass, because in those days there was no such thing as rooming in with mothers. Then it was off to Paddington to see a gallery or two, and there I would often hear the question repeated for many years, "Peter, do you want to take those things home with you today?" As I might do now with a new dress. Is my husband here? Dad was just waiting for the right moment to reveal to Mum that he bought yet another piece of art. On one occasion, Jamie, my brother, went on school holidays to the New Hebrides and was asked to bring back a selection of artefacts for Dad. The customs officer in Sydney was surprised to hear that one of the items he'd unwrapped was a shrunken head. He was even more surprised when cockroaches started crawling out of the hair. Needless to say, the goods were confiscated and Dad was called in for an explanation. Once when I went to Bali for university holidays, Dad asked me to visit Donald Friend to pick up a few things for him. This was a wonderful experience, as Donald's home was always an absolute delight. Typical open Balinese style, filled with treasures and surrounded by luscious tropical gardens. Donald asked me to join him for dinner, but no food ever eventuated. I left some hours and numerous gins and tonic later with a backpack of Balinese bronzes, which I later had to persuade customs were just some little bits and pieces that I picked up in the Kuta beach markets. As some tonight will attest, Dad loved nothing more than to help others spend their money on art. On several occasions, my husband David and I received invoices in the mail for items that we had not bought, but that Dad had decided that we really must have. An old friend, Colin Waller, told me that the first time Dad came into his house, he said simply, "You'll have to get rid of that stuff on your walls. Take it down to the church, and then come with me and we'll buy some decent art." And John has related a similar story tonight. Some of you may have had similar experiences. Dad also helped the Australian Club, the College of Obstetricians and others to build their collections. His generous philanthropy is largely hidden, but his beneficiaries include the University of Sydney and the National Gallery, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, which contains some Asian ceramics of his, and many regional galleries. Dad himself was painted several times. There's a Mulvig shown over here, showing a young doctor in 1966, which was the year I think that Mulvig won the Archibald Prize, while the Mulholland just there, painted in 1997, is a portrayal of the older man as a collector. This is one of two of Henry's portraits of Dad that were hung in the Archibald Prize, and another of Dad in typical pose, watching the cricket with a glass of red wine, was hung in the Salon de Refusé. Bob Dickerson also painted Dad, but in the operating theatre, so his distinctive face was hidden beneath a mask. And a portrait by Frank Hodgkinson of Dad in academic gown hangs with those of other past presidents of the Royal Australasian New Zealand College of Obstetrics and Gynecology in Melbourne. I heard on the radio recently about acquisitive personalities, and the discussant was identifying the risk that such people can be known for what they own rather than what they are. But for Dad, this was never a risk. He had a remarkable medical career with international acclaim. He was an active sportsman. He had a successful marriage, a hectic social life, a remarkable travel regime, and a life dedicated to helping underprivileged women, particularly in Asia, and to training health professionals in that region. Dad loved Fred Williams' work. He favoured Bill Robinson as the best contemporary landscape artist and John Walker as the best young landscape artist. He flagged Shona Trescott as an emerging landscape artist, and he thought that Frank Hodgkinson was grossly underrated. He had an eclectic taste though, and he moved with the times. And as you can see here, he rated people like Anne Wallace, McKenna, Eager, McLeod and Hodges, all of whom feature in this auction. And Janet, I'm going to quote you here, because when people asked what was his prized piece, I'm reminded of Janet McCready's eulogy at Mum's funeral, where she said, "The jewel in the crown of Peter's collection, exquisite collection, was Jan." Thank you.